end-of-life issues are much more complicated today than they were 25 and 30 years ago. There were always many end-of-life issues. But with the emphasis on DNR orders, with the new laws and the new cultural direction for organ donation and other such things, questions that come up with the advances of science and medicine, these issues are issues that are not only important in terms of human need, in terms of social need, but halachically we are dealing with the greatest, most important halachas in the Torah, with ritzicha, with preserving life. These are issues that are unusually complex and unusually important. So I would like to, at this time, call on my chaver, a Rav in our community who has dealt with these issues, as all Rabbanim have dealt with it, but as an expert in these issues, Rabbi Herschel Welcher, to address us.
Good evening, Rabbis. I wanted to acknowledge our presence in the Young Israel and to thank Rabbi Schoenfeld, Shlita, as our host this evening, and particularly for his remarks that he made that when we consider the halachos which deal with these very difficult areas of life, it's an expression of our amunah and the Rabbeinu Shalom, and that's ultimately what halacha states. Halacha is our belief that the Rabbeinu Shalom has given us in our Sinai through Moshe Rabbeinu an answer to all the varied dilemmas that face us in every situation in life. As the masters of the halacha tells us, the Chazon Ish Zechat Tzadik Livrocha writes in one of his letters, there is no such thing as a shayla that doesn't have an answer in the halacha. At times the problem is that we ourselves are not great enough to find that particular answer, but the answers exist. We live in a day and age when our technology has outstripped our moral wisdom. And the entire society struggles with this on a daily basis, that in an ethical and moral sense, we do not really have sufficient insight to deal with all the problems that the technology places upon us. The secular world, in its attempts to define the moral issues surrounding end-of-life issues, starts off with a principle, a very Western liberal principle. And that principle they refer to as autonomy, meaning that every person has the right to make his own decision. Society should not decide and impose upon anyone a decision as to what that person wishes to do. And therefore we've created a culture of living wills. What exactly does a person want done? What methods does he want to use to save himself? What methods doesn't he want? And the person is absolutely in charge. If he says he doesn't want to be given any medicine if he falls ill, and that's in his living will, that'll be honored. He cannot be treated in any fashion against his will. We struggle sometimes to understand where exactly to draw the line. And we had in our society a character who could only be classified according to the halacha as a murderer, as a ratzeach, Jack Kevorkian, who attempted to exploit the moral confusion of our society to promulgate suicide. It was also something appropriate. And our society shrunk back from it, not because intellectually they can really define exactly what's wrong with it, but they realized somehow that the Pandora's box was opening too wide, and they better slam it very, very quickly before they let this out. But philosophically, they have no reason that they should stand against suicide. It's no different than any other autonomous decision that a person makes. If a person is ill and he can be saved and he decides he doesn't want to be saved, that's also suicide halachically. But from that standpoint, that's fine. as long as no one else assists him and is leaving this world. The halacha is very, very strong in the fact that dismissing a notion of autonomy. The halacha states in far lesser issues than taking one's life, chavala ba'atzmo, to cause injury to oneself, we're not a bailam. We are not masters of our own body. Our body is a gift which is entrusted to us by the Rabbeinu Shalom, and we have to care for it according to the dictates of the Rabbeinu Shalom, not according to our own dictates. Society, in its attempt to deal with this problem, wishes that every person that has to enter a hospital enter with a healthcare proxy and perhaps a living will as well. The reasons are very simple. In every hospital, there's a panel, an ethical panel, who has to make decisions about what the hospital is supposed to do or not. If the person has executed a healthcare proxy, so they follow the directives of that and they're fine. If not, they're in a dilemma because they're afraid to act. Maybe they'll be taken to task in court. So they struggle to define it. And if they don't find satisfactory resolution, they will make a decision which protects the hospital and leave it to the family to take them to court to attempt to force them to do something different. Now, unfortunately, for a person to wait until he enters the hospital to sign a healthcare proxy is something which is very unwise. I mean, if a person is fortunate enough that he's still fully conscious and alert and capable of making decisions when he enters a hospital, so then he can execute the healthcare proxy in the hospital. What happens if suddenly a person is taken seriously ill? He suffers a heart attack, a stroke, or some other debilitating illness which comes upon him suddenly. His life now hangs by a thread. Perhaps his life could be saved. But under what directives? He's not in a position to make those decisions. Now is a question that he doesn't have a healthcare proxy. The hospital does not have a clear legal basis on which to act. And we get all of the struggles that go on in society, that Tereshiava, all of these types of cases which go on, as gruesome as they are, because there's not a clear healthcare proxy. Now, the necessity of having it then is quite significant. What is the nature of the healthcare proxy that we should have is very, very important. There are varied versions. There are some which I would call bare bones, which deal with the bare basics, and some which are highly specific. I am not in favor of ones which are highly specific. Highly specific ones will say, for example, does the person want to be placed in dialysis? For example, does he wish to be put on a respirator? All types of significant decisions. Does he wish, end of life, to have hydration and nutrition provided for him? Significant decisions. The problem with making an absolute decision upon them is the halacha does not have one simple answer. One size does not fit all. We have people that are in final stages of terminal illnesses, and in those situations, the halacha looks favorably upon not placing such a person upon a respirator. I'm not offering a specific psak for any particular case, merely that one should understand the gravity of the situation and that one has to have a halachic authority to consult with at such time. On the other hand, there are trauma situations where a person is injured and they're presently too weak, for example, to have respiration on their own, but there's a very good possibility that if we get the person over the initial stage of the trauma, the person will in fact recover and lead a normal life afterwards. And such a person, halachically, we're obligated to place upon a respirator. So for a person to write a living will, no respirators, who knows what tomorrow brings, what the situation that will have to be decided in his own life is. That's why I'm in favor of healthcare proxies which state merely who is empowered to make the decision, and one should select members usually in one's own family that one has confidence in, to articulate the principles upon which the decisions are to be based, as Torah observant Jews, we want those decisions to be made in keeping with the halacha. And number 3 is to appoint a Rav that will actually make those decisions. But when appointing a Rav, one should be very careful. One should do 2 things. One has a Rav that one has confidence in the Pasch and the Shailas, and one should obviously appoint that Rav. But one has to take into account somebody else. What happens if on the day that that decision has to be made, your Rav is on an airplane to Eretz Yisrael right now? And consequently, you can't be reached. There was a Rav that was approached in Queens a number of years back, a good number of years back, and someone came to him and said, listen, Rabbi, my mother's in a nursing home. I don't have a rabbi to take care of her. Will you take care of the funeral for her when she does? And the rabbi was gracious enough, he consented. On the day that this woman died, the rabbi was in transit and was totally unreachable. So whatever he had to do, but the best laid plans of mice and men, but on that particular day, the rabbi was out of the loop. So what I always suggest to people for that reason is that beyond the particular rabbi that one chooses, is one appoint an organization, a rabbinic organization, that in the absence of availability of that Rav, the rabbinic organization will choose an authority of their choosing to make those decisions.
And maybe the convention, all the rabbis. And maybe the convention, all the rabbis.
Send them an email.
Secretary will not reach.
Yeah. So that's what I always suggest, whether it be, there are major rabbinic organizations that exist, major communal organizations that exist, but to appoint one of them as the backup. Now, I'm very partial for that reason. I am not, as anyone that knows me knows, that I belong to exactly one organization, period, and that's the Vadar Rabbanim of Queens. I am not a member of any other organization. And consequently, I'm not beholden to anyone. No one, I don't lose any sleep over what organizations do. And I can tell you very unequivocally for that reason, not for any political reasons, I like the healthcare proxy of the Kadisha Yisrael for that reason. I do not like the RCA's healthcare proxy. For the reason that the RCA's healthcare proxy has all types of things, I don't want this type of treatment to this type of treatment. And one cannot make such broad statements halachically. Those are decisions that have to be made at the moment and at the time. And they're very difficult decisions to be made. The doctors in today's society are always pushing people to sign DNRs. Do not resuscitate. Now, do not resuscitate directives are unwise for more than one reason. Besides halachic reasons, which we'll come to in a moment. But they're unwise on practical grounds. Hospitals have their own culture. And it's important to understand that culture of the hospitals before we place ourselves in their heads. If one signs a DNR, so what that means to the hospital staff is that this person is written off. They have no longer have any respect for them or use for them whatsoever. This is now just someone that's on the way out, and the faster the better. And they will treat the person in a very inappropriate fashion from that point on, without any appropriate care, or oftentimes with inappropriate care. And therefore it is very, very unwise, just on practical grounds, to give a standing DNR for that reason. We live in an age of cell phones today. One can tell the hospital if their crisis erupts in the middle of the night, here's a cell phone number, there's 5 cell phone numbers of varied family members, call us up, and we'll give you a decision what has to be done. We no longer live in an age where if you're traveling on the road from the hospital to your house, that you can't be reached for 2 hours. Communication is instantaneous in today's world. We have BlackBerries, cell phones, a million more types of communication that we know what to do with. So today, certainly, we have no reason to give them such broad license. The other reason is there are halachic considerations. From their perspective, they're oftentimes very, very quick to do away with people. Someone comes in, suffered severe trauma, goodbye, they're finished. We don't want to be bothered with them. Rabbi Shapiro, Rav Shlomo Shapiro of our neighborhood, was involved in a situation a number of years back. A girl was injured, a frum girl was injured in some type of bus accident. She fell out of a bus, And she was in very severe shape when she came into the hospital. And the doctors wanted to put a DNR on her and send her to the Olam Emes. But he had to sign off on it, and he refused to sign off. He said that they have to do what they can to save her. 3 weeks later, the girl left the hospital. But before she left the hospital, he called in the medical director, said, "You see this young woman here? That's the one that you wanted to send to our grave 3 weeks ago with the DNR." And this is Ma'asim B'chol Yom. It goes on every single day. A number of years back, I'm in the car one night. The beeper, the telephone goes off. I don't remember which one. I call. It's a frum doctor, a very prominent frum doctor. He has a relative in the hospital in a major medical center here in the city of New York. And they called up, in fact, the frum doctor called up suggesting, and more than suggesting, being very pushy, that they should put a DNR on an older woman. The doctor called me, and he said, "Please, can we get together and decide if a DNR is appropriate or not?" I went to his house. We reviewed the situation. He said he cannot understand any medical reason why it's warranted. And what did I think? I said, halachically, I agree with him. It's not warranted. So we decided we're going to go down to the hospital that night and prevail upon the doctors that they're not putting a DNR on this person. But he got on the phone, and he was forceful enough on the phone that they backed down. They made elementary mistakes in her treatment. And once he started to realize what was involved in it, and he got on their case, they started to treat her. I can only tell you that the woman is alive and well some 5 years or so later. Baruch Hashem, she's seen the birth of many great-grandchildren since that time. She's quite alive and well and doing well for herself. And Ma'asim B'chol Yom. So these are decisions that have to be made very, very carefully and not with the biases of the medical establishment. I mean, it is so bad in some places in Holland. It is estimated that there are over 10,000 people that euthanasia is done to each year without even consulting the families. The doctors decided they're unworthy of life. Now, they have, from their perspective, one of the things that hospitals are willing to do is to stop hydration and nutrition. Means basically to starve a person to death. That's what they're willing to do. And this is totally normative practice in the medical establishment today. They send the person to their room, they deny him any nutrition whatsoever, any water whatsoever, and in a few days they expire. Ma'asim B'chol Yom, it goes on every single day. The agreement, I believe universally, if not universally, almost universally, and certainly normative halacha, is that such a practice is totally unwarranted. That nutrition and hydration have to be provided under all situations. Now, there are times that they overtreat people too. And that's for a reason that I mentioned before. If there's not a clear directive, they'll sometimes put people on machines merely to protect the hospital from a lawsuit. To unnecessarily prolong a person's life when a person has no possibility of recovery, and their life is reduced to what we call chayei shah, a very, very short-term existence, which, according to Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, would mean an existence which is clearly less than a year. That is very hard to gauge exactly until one gets very, very close to the end of life. But to unnecessarily treat a person at that point and to prolong the suffering is, from the standpoint of Rabbi Moshe Zechat Tzadik Livrocha, a very, very severe chet. And this also will go on if there's no healthcare proxy. Now, there are also other issues which are involved, and that's why we need healthcare proxies. We have all types of, and I can only call it propaganda, entering our community too in favor of organ transplants. You know, in one's driver's license, one has a card in the back of the driver's license if we will allow organ transplantation. Now, the problem with this is, number one, it is based upon some in our community that are pushing brain death as the standard of death. The halacha historically and classically accepted the cessation of respiration as the definition of death. The greatest living poskim that we have today, that we in the last generation since the Shaila came up, Rabbi Welcher Shlita of Eretz Yisrael, Lo Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Zechat Tzadik Livrocha, have unequivocally written that that remains the definition of death. In all the writings of Rav Moshe Feinstein that were published during his lifetime. We have no inkling whatsoever of a different standard. Now, there are those that claim that there was a different standard, that he verbally gave a different standard. The gravity of such a halacha is such that it brings to mind that after the death of the Vilna Gaon, the Bezdin in Vilna made a takana. And that is that if anyone had heard a psak, halacha, in any area of halacha from the Vilna Gaon, they were not to issue that psak halacha without first coming to the Bezdin. The Bezdin would review that psak to see if it was conceivably correct and if it was accurate, and only then would it allow it to go forth, because they were concerned that a person such as the Vilna Gaon had so many revolutionary opinions. There are many, in fact, that would not have fully understood that which the Gaon said, and unwittingly would misrepresent it. Now, we cannot base a halacha, such as the redefinition of death in the Jewish community, on some oral transmission, which we do not have first of all, the halachic background for, what it was based on, that the decision was made, and without a signed document of a gadol of the stature of the greatest poskim of the latter part of the 20th century, who has signed off and told us that he has made this decision. We do not have that. We have a dubious document published after Moshe Feinstein's life in his name, which was not signed by him. So we cannot, that's my first objection to it. The second is, it runs afoul of a very simple halacha, the notion of organ transplantation. Except, and perhaps in Eretz Yisrael, it could be in certain situations allowed. The first, as I pointed out, normally organs are harvested while the respiration is still taking place, because afterwards, after the respiration ceases, they deteriorate very rapidly. Secondly, the halacha articulates the fact that a mace, a deceased person, is also bahana, and we cannot take any benefit from it. There was a person in Cleveland that the hospital in Cleveland, he was dying, and they wanted to make a transplant, and they asked Moshe Feinstein if he should allow it or not. And Moshe asked him one question: was the recipient of this transplant a Jew or a non-Jew? And he happened to know in this case it was a non-Jew, and Moshe Feinstein told him it's halachically forbidden to do so. And the grounds are very simple. A mace is osir bahana. We have a principle that pikuach nefesh is doicha kol haTorah kulam. But that pikuach nefesh, to push away every isur in the Torah, is only for a Jewish person. Under what circumstances we may give a push away isurim in the Torah for the sake of non-Jews, there are times and places when it's permissible. But that's a subject in its own right. We cannot just give a general license for that. There are times certainly that the halacha allows it, and we have, for example, the Hatzalah takes care of non-Jews on Shabbos just as well as it takes care of Jews. But these are particular piskei din for particular situations, not a broad license for every situation. Now finally, and it also brings up, it's all connected with the end-of-life issues, is the issue of hospice. The issue of hospice at times is warranted and at times is not warranted. And this is also something without proper directives and without proper halacha guidance is often overused. They send the person to hospice, they no longer, the philosophy of hospice is not to treat the person for his illness. Is only to provide palliative care, to make the person as comfortable as possible. I went up to Calvary Hospital in the Bronx a number of years back. If I recall correctly, the year was the end of 1983. 1982. Yeah, 1982. December 1982, I went up to Calvary Hospital. A woman that I knew went to the hospice there. They decided she was dying, I think, of lung cancer. She had a few months to live, so she sent her to the hospice. I went to visit her then. Pesach time came about a half a year later, and she decided she had enough of being in the hospice. You know, she wasn't dying, and she wasn't about to die, so she decided to come on. She said so long to them, and she came back home. And she came home, and she lived for another 10 months at home afterwards. So, from their standpoint, they were writing her off a year and a half before she died. Goodbye, through with her. They did not even perform the tests to ascertain if she actually had a cancer that they supposed that she had, because why put her through the pain of a test if we're just sending her out to pasture anyhow? So these are real issues which take place on a daily basis. And that's really the reason that we need to have proper proxies filled out, to place ourselves in the care of the halacha, as Rav Schoenfeld defined it at the beginning. I believe halacha is itself our expression of amunah, that the Rebbeinu Shalom has given us a means to confront everything that we have to confront in life. May the Rebbeinu Shalom grant us that we not be confronted with these shaylas. For many, many years as a Rav, I had this chus that I wasn't asked these questions. When it caught up to me very rapidly, in short order. But may the Rebbeinu Shalom grant that all of us, in fact, be spared from having to ask these questions. May we instead be preoccupied with shaylas concerning simchas, adbiyas gil tzedek, me'er Amen.